Anyone who has ever found themselves in an abusive relationship can understand the complexity of loving someone who hurts you. But the less talked about struggle is overcoming the stigma of your own fragility after it's over. My next guest grew up in a small Christian community in Amman, Jordan, the daughter of a man with an unpredictable temper and a mother who felt a decent marriage proposal for her daughter would be an opportunity out. Today, she's going to share how her dream suitor turned into a nightmare situation that included death threats from her father, a brave escape, and a braver rebuilding of self. Connecting soul and shattering limitations, author, survivor, and thriver, Dima Ghawi. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Meredith. Thank you. I'm excited to talk with you.
I loved your book. I read it while I was on a camping trip and I just couldn't put it down. And I even forgot that I was reading it for research. I was like, oh, yeah, I should take notes because you just paint a picture so beautifully of the complexity and beauty of your culture and the situation and the people around you and the love and the confusion. Like, I really felt it as a reader. And I feel like that's probably not the easiest thing to do. So I was really impressed by it. And there's so much to dig into. So I want to encourage people to get the book when they can. But for our conversation today, I was hoping we could start with your engagement because you were kind of, as a young girl, like looking around and assessing your situation and your options. And you were introduced to a promising young bachelor that you felt would have been different from some of the men that you weren't really admiring. You were like, oh, this guy's different. So tell us about Malek.
Yeah. So Malik is, by the way, Malik means the person who owns, and that's in Arabic.
Is that his real
And
name?
no, all the names got changed. But when I was working on writing Breaking Vases, I was so intentional in changing all the names and making sure that they are aligned with the character that I want to give to the reader. So Malik, as you mentioned, was the most eligible bachelor in our community. My mom met him years before I met him. And she told me that she was praying to Mother Mary for years that we would end up being together. So when his father called and they said that they were coming to visit us for Christmas, my mom and my dad, they were so funny. They just made sure everything was perfect. My mom was cleaning for days. She was baking so she can brag about her cooking because that would reflect so positively about me. They told me what to wear, and they also told me to skip classes in the afternoon. I was in college, first year in college. So they didn't want me to take any classes in the afternoon. So I would come home and I would rest, take a long nap for my beauty rest, and wake up being fresh to meet our guests. So they had the whole thing planned because they really, really, really wanted this to work. Malik was, or he is still a jeweler, and he made tons of money at a young age. His family, they're well known in our community. So that would have been the perfect engagement and somebody for me to marry based on what my family thought.
And if I remember correctly, he was educated in the United States. And so, in your mind, I think you mentioned in the book that you perceived that it would have more modern elements to the dynamics of the potential marriage.
Yes. Yes. So he would have Western thinking, appreciation for women empowerment, encouraging me to grow. I was so happy about all of that. Yeah.
So, when did you realize it was going downhill versus when you realized I gotta leave?
Yeah. It started from the beginning because one day we were in our kitchen and I was so excited because I was new in the US. I was newly married. Everything appeared to be perfect. And I was curious why he chose me. He could have picked any woman in our community and her parents would have loved to have her marry Malik, just like my parents did. So I asked him, I said, why me? Why did you choose me? And I was waiting for him to tell me because of my beautiful eyes or
Right.
that he fell in love with me at first sight or things I heard in Arabic love songs. But instead, he responded and he said, because you're like dough, a dough.
Mm.
So there's a 10-year difference. I was in my early 20s, he was in his early 30s. And I didn't realize that he was looking for someone much younger so he can shape her. And that's what he said. He wanted to shape me the way he wanted. He wanted me to see the world the way he does. So he wanted easy way of control. And the fact that I was away from my family in Jordan, it was just me. And it was perfect environment that was created for control. I wasn't allowed to have friends. I wasn't allowed to talk to my mom more than once a week for 20 minutes, and he had to be next to me. It had to be on the weekend. But then, thank goodness, the one thing I really wanted that I was allowed to do was to work on my education. I wanted to be the first educated woman in our family. And thank goodness I was permitted to go to college.
When did all of those things that an outsider would obviously go, oh my God, like you got to get out of that situation? Like, when was that, oh my God, I got to get out of this situation moment for you?
So it wasn't a moment where I woke up and I said, this happened and I have to escape. It wasn't like this at all. Instead, I went into very deep depression. And in my culture, we don't talk about depression and mental illness. It's considered something bad, and nobody talked about it. So I didn't understand what was happening to me. I didn't understand where I would wake up in the morning and feel so low with my energy. I would keep calling. I had a teller job, so I would call in sick. It just kept getting worse and worse, and I didn't understand what was wrong. So I called my mom one day. I broke the rules and I called her in the middle of the week. And I said, I don't know why I'm feeling this way. And she said, Dima, you're not any different than all the other women. Just get pregnant, and that should make your life better.
Oh my God.
So, and I realized that he didn't understand what I was dealing with. We just kept getting more and more distant between us. He started a business in Jordan, so he had to fly back to Jordan. And I realized as I was in the US, I was required to live with his mom. I could not be alone. And I realized I wasn't missing him. I realized my depression was getting worse and worse. And that's, I feel, was the best blessing ever, because it made me question the norm. It made me question the stories and the programming and all of these things that I was dealing with. So even though somebody may hear my story and say depression is bad, yes, depression is not the best time, but it shakes us, it shook me, and it helped me realize that I deserve better. I want a different life. I want to create the life. And that's when things fell apart.
Yeah. Yeah. There's always that conflict when
Mm.
you realize your situation doesn't have to be what it is, because as women, we're so adaptable, and I think that's awesome in a lot of ways. We're survivors, but in other ways, it really, really works against us because for however many years since caveman days that we have been working to survive and to not anger our male counterparts who are bigger and stronger than us, like it can also work against us, and that we convince ourselves that things are normal when they're not, which I thought was so interesting that you could even see yourself outside of the context of this situation, that you could visualize for yourself anything different. Where do you think that seed was planted for you?
I think it was just my spirit. I really do. Because I didn't have role models. I didn't see any woman in my community that challenged the norm or was a role model. I just thought my spirit wanted me to do something bigger. Because I believe now a lot of the things I'm doing is purpose driven. So my spirit wanted to put me on this purpose. And as if I needed to go so low with the depression, being disowned by my family, eventually getting the death threats that I'm living with for so long since 2001, to really shake me and help me connect with my purpose and help put me on a path where I can feel the pain that other people are experiencing. I can connect with them even before they talk about it. And as a result, help them in the journey as well.
What about that woman that you talked about in your book who was at a party, or maybe you were hosting the party and she was at Chill's house and she had gone to university, and while all the other women in the party were gossiping about whose relationship was on the rocks and, who didn't dress right, she was talking about current events. Do you feel like having her even just within your space made any impact on how you viewed yourself?
Yeah, I only met this woman once, and I wouldn't call it even meeting because we didn't talk. I was just fascinated by her existence. I was maybe 12 or 13. I'm trying to remember the exact age. And my parents hosted a party. And we used to love those because that's when you have all the good food and you get to dance and all of this. And this woman who worked with my uncle came and she studied in the US. She looked so confident. She was talking about the economy and politics, and as if she was an alien in my head because I've never, ever saw a woman that is that confident. She was equal to men. And I just loved it. So I just kept staring at her. It was absolutely amazing. It gave me a sense that there are women that can be like that. But at that time, I was just so disconnected from that image because to me, that was not who I was born to be. I was
Oh.
born to be eventually the wife, to clean and cook and take care of the family. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's what the woman wants. But in my world, there was no choice. That is the path and the only path. So even though I saw her and it was just she was like superwoman, but to me, she was more like a fantasy. She was more something unreachable, something that you may see once in a lifetime. And I loved that now I became her. She doesn't even know it. I am her. And I'm hoping that with even my presence, with my work, with the podcast, with all the wonderful people like you that I get to meet, I'm able to inspire and help people on their journey as well.
That's so interesting that you say like it was your spirit that like drove you to break out of the shell that this situation kind of wrapped around you. And I wonder if it's your spirit, even as like a preteen that recognized her, because had you been any different, perhaps she would have blended into the background of all the people there. So it really is a lesson on like you never know who's watching. So yeah, that's really
Yes.
interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
so you had decided to leave and it was spring of 2001. You called your dad to tell him, hey, this is happening. What was his
Mm.
reaction?
Initially, it was great. So there was always a tension between my dad and my ex-husband. It is the toxic masculinity of control and who has the bigger say. And so there was a lot of tension between them from the beginning. And my dad was very supportive. He said, "Yes, leave him. And you deserve better. And I'm not going to let him treat you the way my ex husband was treating me." But it turned out to be a trick. My dad was mainly trying to have control. I thought he was like, wow, finally I have the dad who's going to support me. And I ended up escaping, and my dad even helped me with the escape. So while I was focusing on freedom and new beginning and appreciating myself and discovering my identity, my dad was focused on control and hoping that my ex husband would go and beg him to take me back. And as a result, it would give him the upper hand.
Mm.
And when that didn't happen, my dad couldn't handle it, especially when the community started reaching out to him and asking him, what's going on with Dima? And we heard that Dima left her husband. And my dad couldn't take it. So he gave me a choice of either going back or that he is going to disown me. But then that grew when I didn't go back, it turned out into death threats. So that is something I've been dealing with now for the last 23 years. And the only reason I'm alive here today is because he's in Jordan and he doesn't speak English. And thank goodness he couldn't figure out how to navigate to get to me. And I'm in the US. I travel around the world. I just don't go to one country, which is Jordan, at least as long as my dad is alive.
Mm. How did you know that those death threats were legit and not a temper tantrum?
That's such a great question because that is something I've been reflecting on for many, many years. And I realized that many times an abuser, they don't need to take action. They just need to threaten. And that is enough to keep the person like me living in fear, living in misery. And the fact, thank goodness, my dad didn't get to me, it doesn't mean that my life has been easy because dealing with these death threats, like he would say that he's going to turn me into a minced meat. So you can only imagine, I don't eat meat. I don't eat minced meat. Just the concept of constant threat and him reaching out to community members and asking them to deliver these messages to me, that by itself is more than enough to make me live in fear. Of course, I keep watching my surroundings, and maybe something will happen in the future, maybe not. But I believe early on, especially when I was young, because when I escaped, I was just 25. I had no money. I barely was surviving financially, emotionally, all kinds of ways. It worked because the threats were so painful, like the abuse worked. Now, as a mature woman, I have my community, I have my confidence, I have my identity. So maybe it doesn't work as much, but there's the inner child inside of me that continues to be afraid. And there continues to be work that I need to do related to healing and forgiveness and working on deeper and deeper work constantly.
When was the last time that you received a death threat from him, either directly or through a community member?
It was 2018, and actually no, 2019, because that's when I published my book. He found out about my book, and he said that he is going to get his revenge even after 60 years. And the revenge is killing me for leaving a bad marriage. Like, what? It's not like I did anything bad. And he said, I cried about it at that time, but now I think it's funny that even if he doesn't get his revenge, and he dies, he's gonna become a ghost and hunt me.
Hmm.
Now I laugh about it. But
Yeah.
this taught me about the balance related to the toxic masculinity and the toxic feminine side as well. Because what my dad represents is a lot of the toxic masculine control, threatening, abusing. But I realized that the feminine was not that healthy either, because
Right.
you mentioned the women were gossiping, the women were allowing the control. The women many times were forcing like the younger generations to just follow and to obey. The women were manipulating, they were lying. That was their way to get what they needed.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
that is something I'm working on right now, is how can I heal the toxic feminine? Like, it's easy to talk about the toxic masculine. There's so many stories about that. But what do I need to do to heal as well the toxic feminine in order to reach a balance, which is the healthy way of being?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up. It's so interesting. I have so many thoughts flowing through my mind. I interviewed a gender expert a while ago, and we talked about trad wives. Do you know what that trend is on the internet?
No, what is that?
It's where women, like young women right now in their 20s,
Mm.
will decide to be very traditional housewives, even to the point of like dressing like they're from the 1950s, and which is not in itself anything bad, but then they're like, no, I don't go to the gym without my husband, and I do whatever he says, and there's like this unusual power balance. And it can go the other way too, where in other circumstances the woman really controls the household. She doesn't let the father parent the children, and nothing he does is right. And in two different episodes we talked about this struggle and how it roots from women not having control historically, and then they want control again. What's interesting and how it relates to your scenario is that it's like all the outside voices, right? Because when I have talked to women who have been in abusive relationships, the hardest thing is to help them hear their own voice again. And in your case, you had all these women telling you, like, this is how we do it, and just have a baby and it'll be fine. And then we can get together. We can all talk about how miserable we are. It'll be
Yeah.
great. You should totally
Yeah.
sign up to do this. And then you had all the men talking about, like, not only should you not have sex before marriage, don't you even get caught. Like your dad threatened you on your first day of college saying, like, if you talk to a guy, I will know about it and quote, it'll be the end of you. Like, I was surprised the death threat started so early. I was like, that is so severe. So how did you, as someone who wanted to break free from that scenario, how did you find what your own voice was? How did you begin to trust your own thoughts again after so many years of conditioning?
Wow. I wouldn't call it trust at all. All I wanted was to leave a bad marriage. So now we look at the big picture and say, wow, you took this big initiative or you're so courageous. It wasn't like that at all. I just wanted to leave a bad marriage. I didn't know what was going to happen a week later. I didn't know what was going to happen a month later. Of course, after a while, I continued to build myself up and do better and better. But at that moment, it's just a matter of escape, just needed to be away.
One goal.
Eventually, so and I did give myself some time where I was watching like 3, 4 movies a day. It was so funny at that time. There was the Blockbuster. They had 30 movies for 30 days for $30, and I could afford that. So I would watch one movie a day multiple times, 2 or 3 times. I keep repeating it. So it wasn't at all where I had a plan and I had a vision and I knew what I'm supposed to do. But now when I look back, what I truly did, whether I realized it or not, I gave myself time to heal because just by watching movies, by sleeping a lot, I did that. The other thing is I focus on education. So I went back to college because I needed new vision for my life, and I, even though I didn't know what how that would look like, I knew education would allow me to get it. We have a phrase in Arabic that translates to knowledge is light and ignorance is darkness. So I needed more light into my life. So that's how I went to college to get that. But also I started surrounding myself intentionally with people that believed in me, and that is so important, and accepting help, asking for help, because I realized that in order for me to survive, I needed people to provide me, to help me, and be okay to receive it, which was difficult for me early on in my life.
Yeah. I mean, I love that you're saying, like, hey, I just had a singular goal. I was just trying to exit this marriage.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think my listeners would agree that's actually a pretty big deal because not only did you leave it, but then you left it and were able to go, okay, what's next? And then you started on the what's next. And then that ended up being this book. Did your dad read the book, by the way?
I don't think he did. There's no way for me to know. All I know is that he told everybody in the community that I'm a liar, I'm doing this for money, and it's fine. He can say whatever he wants, but just my assumption is he did not
He
read it.
probably did.
He doesn't speak English. I would be surprised if he got somebody to read it and translate it for him.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because as someone who has met many women in abusive situations, I could almost read what was not written. And I was like, this is actually a very kind rendition of probably the reality that you faced. Was there anything in the book that you felt like, okay, I have to leave this out that you wish you could have written?
I did leave things out, and I don't wish I wrote them because it is mainly specific things related to my mom. My mom's some health issues she had to experience. I had to omit some things related to my sister and how the low points she got, like got through as she was dealing with all of this. And I left these things out of respect for my mom and my sister because that is not my story to tell. It is their story to tell. But it's interesting because after I wrote the book, my uncle, who I love and I dedicated the book to, he reached out to me and he said, "This is so well done, but I recommend for you to omit certain sections." And he put these sections. To me, it's so funny. The section he wants me to cut, it was about the boyfriend I had in college. And he's
Oh,
like, nobody needs to know that. And to me, it's hilarious because here I am, I'm being vulnerable. I'm showing my mistakes and what I'm experiencing. And I'm talking about not being perfect and being okay with all of these experiences. But to him, it's being perceived as a mistake. And he's like, just take it out, take it
mm,
out. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to take it out. It is supporting my message. And what he's recommending for me is to look perfect, to look so pure, and to omit any of these little cracks. That is the opposite of what I'm trying to teach.
that's funny that you use the word cracks
Yeah.
because that was, the book's called Breaking Vases. And in the very first few chapters, you talk about the talk that you kept getting from your mom and your aunties and all the people, the women in the
Yeah.
community who said, a woman's life is like a vase, and any impurity in the vase is like a crack. And once it's cracked, you can't uncrack it. And I think, what's so interesting is like, if you took this in a different religion, like, I think it would be so easy for Westerners to go, oh, yeah, of course, over there, those folks over there, that's a problem that they did. But I love that you were from a small Christian community, and it blended with the complexity of being a Middle Eastern community also. Because in the West, we have this problem too of the purity culture that puts so much pressure on young women and young men, and it creates really an environment that is ripe for bad situations, to put it lightly.
Yeah. And in my speeches, I'm so intentional in mentioning that I was born and raised Catholic. And to me, it's funny when people question, they're like, wow, we didn't know there's Christians in the Middle East. And I'm like, where was Christ born and raised? Where?
Yeah, yeah.
So to me, it is funny.
It is funny.
But I'm intentional in sharing this because I don't want to build on the biases that people have related to various religions. This has nothing to do with religion. And honestly, this has nothing to do with just the Middle Eastern culture. There's experiences like this all around the world.
Mhm.
And this is part of our journey to shatter these vases as if it becomes part of our purpose to identify these cultural stories that we've been taught early on in our lives and question them, change them, pass forward a better life and better stories to the next generations. So it's not just about the Middle East. And the thing is, how can we rise beyond the shards? And this is so important for me because even though it does take so much courage to break the vase, to question the norm, to take action, to be courageous, but what's next? And
Yes.
that really is the hard part, being broken emotionally, financially, socially, and to find a way to rise.
Yes, because there's something about that survival mode of operating that feels akin to an ambitious spirit. And you were a very ambitious young woman. You had a rising career at IBM. You were like getting promoted, and you got to work like abroad and do all this cool stuff. I wonder though if you felt like when you started to find peace in your life, regardless of the scenario that you were in, still receiving death threats from your father, did you feel like that piece worked against your ambition that you were kind of gaining momentum with from that survival mode? Because survival mode and ambition, I think they're cousins. Like they have that real like push to them when you think about those states of mind. And so when you have peace, sometimes there's no push. And I'm wondering if that happened to you at all.
Wow. I just love what you just said. I agree with you that like the survival mode fuels our ambitions. And many times I used to think that I'm a very ambitious person. I didn't realize that I was just escaping. I was escaping from dealing with my emotions. I buried all of these emotions just to be able to survive. What happened to me, it wasn't that I found peace as you're talking about. I got very sick and I ended in the hospital. And many times our body knows, our body reacts to all of these emotions. There's a book called Buried Emotions Never Die. It shows up some way. Whether it is shows up as depression, as cancer, something, we try to hide these emotions and they pop up and we have to deal with them. That's what happened to me years after my escape. I had to deal with all of these emotions that I wasn't ready to face. I buried them. I call it, I put them all in a big, black, invisible box. But they would show up once in a while and I would freak out and I put them back in the box and lock the box. And then there would be a little escape. So what happened is I focused on working hard. I was working day, night, and weekends and all the time. And I really, really thought it is ambitious, but it wasn't. It was just escaping until I got sick. And I got the swine flu in 2009, and it attacked my liver for some reason. But in Chinese medicine, I learned later, liver represents anger. Isn't that interesting? I was burying all of this anger in my liver, and I didn't realize it. And what happened was I had no energy to move. I was laying down all day long. And that's when it was a major awakening, as if my body didn't want me to work, didn't want me to do anything, and just wake up. And the awakening was I need to heal, I need to forgive. But I didn't know where to start. And I started reaching out to different counselors and healers and did energy work and all of that. And initially it was going well, but then I got busy again with my work because it's easy to go back to the old ways. I was working on the couch on my laptop and I hurt my neck. And I was just like, oh, I don't know what to do. So I never been to a chiropractor before. And I Googled, I found a chiropractor. Somehow he had an opening. I went and I saw him. And once he adjusted my neck, he looked at me in the eye and he said something so shocking. This man doesn't know me, doesn't know my story, doesn't know anything about my background. But he looked at me in the eye and he said, I see you have some forgiveness to do.
What?
Apparently, he's not just a chiropractor, he's a psychic too.
Oh,
I
God.
started crying and I cried all night. And I kept going back to him because he saw something that I did not admit to myself. And that's truly when my journey started. And the forgiveness that he was talking about was not about forgiving my dad and my ex-husband and my community. It was about forgiving myself. How can I forgive them if I don't forgive myself? Even though as a young woman, I had to deal with all of these unfair things in my life, it's easy to realize how I blamed myself, how I was unhappy about the fact that I disobeyed the elders, that I am not a good person because I didn't follow and do whatever I was told. There's all of this negative narrative in my head that was happening, and I had to heal that. So when we talk about rising beyond the shards, a big part of it is healing. And I'm very grateful that I made the time and I made the investment while I saw all my friends buying properties and investing in the stock market. My money was going to healers because the good ones were not covered by insurance. And when I think about it, it is the best investment ever because I cannot rise over and over beyond the shards without stopping and healing.
So is that forgiveness or is that just deprogramming yourself?
It's both. It's absolutely both.
That's interesting. I didn't expect forgiveness to really enter the chat. So many victims of abusive situations, they become calibrated to chaos. And so everything that you're talking about, slowing down and finding healing and finding forgiveness, when you have chaos at such a young age, you kind of become addicted to it. Like your brain is literally formed in a different way because of the crisis that is always happening. Like your dad, you were always like tiptoeing around him and your mom was teaching you how to tiptoe around him. And so you learned that at a new age. Did you ever find that you accidentally re-entered friendships or romantic relationships that had similar elements of chaos?
Yeah. Yes. It's yes, absolutely, because it's familiar, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, for example, dating a man who's emotionally unavailable, right? That repeats a lot of the cycle that I had to deal with my dad, and this is something that I'm constantly healing and working on. Because again, it is just like when we hear about a person who had parents that were drug addicts and then they end up meeting somebody who's a drug addict and they keep attracting the same person. It is the same. So in my situation, it is my dad, I don't think he was emotionally available. And somehow I keep attracting these kind of people. So that's why I need to keep working on deprogramming, reprogramming my brain, but also to question what is the messages I'm telling myself. So, for example, one of the things I have been telling myself for so long, because of these experiences, I'm not lovable or feeling abandoned, feeling that I am not worthy of love. all of that. It is so sad because I consider myself a very loving person. But if my head, all of these hidden messages that I'm not even aware I'm telling myself, keeps repeating these stories and keeps confirming them with every relationship. So relationship doesn't work. What's going to happen instead of me saying, thank goodness I got out of this bad relationship and I didn't invest more time in it. What do? I tell myself, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy of love. So that is something I have constantly to keep working towards fixing.
So what does that look like for you now? Like, what is this process? Because it seems like it would be really tricky, to use an overly simple word, to continue on this journey of self-healing and in the process attempting to support and elevate others as you are without having victimhood become your whole identity. Do you know what I mean? Like, is there ever a tug of war there? Because on the one hand, you're like giving TEDx talks and talking to people about your story very openly, like you're doing the podcast circuit to help promote your book and help show people like there's another way of being, regardless of religion, regardless of culture, all these things that are really, really good. And at the same time, kind of require you to retell the story that you're trying to untell yourself.
Mm. Yes. Yes, absolutely. And when you talk about the being a victim, it's so important for me to constantly keep reminding myself I am not a victim. This is part of my purpose. I needed to go very, very, very low in my life. And that's why I keep mentioning about rising beyond the shards. If we just break the vase and we're just stuck there, yes, then we may be a victim and be like, oh, you see, I'm broken. It took me courage. Look at all the bad things that happened in my life. Instead, if we start thinking about how can we rebuild ourselves to a new life that we create, how can we look at these people that come into our life and see them as a teacher? I believe my dad I don't know if is, he's not in my life, but how can I see him as a teacher to get me to where I am right now? So, yes, it is easy to see ourselves as a victim. And that's why I struggle every time I give my talk, because I have to feel and to relive the experience every single time in order for me to project the experience to my audience, to my viewer. So I have to imagine, like, relive it over and over and over. But the point is not be stuck there because
Yeah.
I'm not a victim. And to connect with the image that we all have superpowers and it has been polluted with the world we're living in. It has been polluted by what society tells us about what our role should be. It's being polluted by our own insecurities. But how can we clean it up? And through healing, through forgiveness, through finding the right community, seeing people that want to support us, how can we clean it up to discover this beautiful light that's within us that allows us to continue to grow? And their victimhood never can exist and survive in that environment.
I can't think of a more perfect way to wrap up our discussion with what you just said. Thank you so much for being on this journey and being so vulnerable to share that you're still on it. I think that is probably the most inspiring part is that you're not like, well, I checked that box and moved on. You're walking through it imperfectly, but in every way that you possibly can, including being so generous to share your story. So I will definitely link your book, Breaking Vases, in the show notes so that people can buy it. But tell us about your leadership program before we wrap up and how people can interact with you in that way too.
So I believe there's no separation between our personal and business lives. And many times, not just many, all the time, we're bringing all of our insecurities, low self-worth, low self-awareness into business, and we question why are we not advancing? So that is what I focus on. How can we shatter these horrible programming, focus on self-discovery in order to be better leaders? So I offer a 1-year leadership program, and it's all about that. It's about self-discovery, understanding how we lead, how we communicate, how we manage conflict, and what do we avoid in business that is stopping us from truly discovering and advancing our potential.
And that's for women or men and women?
It's for anyone who is in their mid career that is interested to continue to advance.
Thank you so much for this. I really appreciate your time. It's been awesome getting to know you too.
I love it. Thank you, Meredith. And thank you for having this podcast and featuring stories to inspire other people as well.